140 motorcycles filling a dead-end residential street before the sun came up was not something the town of Ridgway, Ohio had ever seen, and certainly not for a 7-year-old girl in a house most of those men had never set foot in. They filled Sycamore Street curb to curb in the gray hour before dawn, headlights cutting the cold mist, engines rumbling low and then going silent all at once, 140 of them, leather and chrome and breath fogging in the November air, standing in a wall across the front yard of a little rented clapboard house. The porch light was on. The grass was white with frost, and on the other side of that front door, a child who had cried herself nearly empty was about to open it and find out that the thing her father had promised her before he died was true after all. It started the way the biggest things sometimes do, with the smallest thing in the world, 3 words a little girl whispered into a phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. In the dark, with her hand over her mouth so the man in the next room wouldn't hear. To understand those 3 words, you have to know about a man named Daniel Mercer, though almost no one in Ridgway called him that. They called him Tank. He had earned the name Young, and the patch younger, a wide slab of a man with a beard down his chest and a laugh you could hear across a parking lot. For 19 years he'd ridden with the local charter, and in all that time the worst thing anyone could ever say about him was that he gave too much away. He worked a forklift days and fixed his brother's bikes nights and never once asked to be paid for it. When a member's roof went bad, Tank was on it by Saturday. When a brother's marriage came apart, Tank was the one who sat up with him until the bottle was empty and the worst of it was over. The men in that charter would have walked into fire for him, and a few of them, over the years, more or less had. 8 months before that frost-white morning, the cancer took him. It took him fast, the way it does the strong ones. 3 months from the first cough to the last breath, and the man who held his hand at the end was the oldest member of the charter, a lean, gray, quiet man everyone called Bishop. Bishop had patched Tank in 19 years before. Bishop had been the best man at his wedding. And it was Bishop who leaned close in that hospital room when the machines were the only thing still talking, and heard Tank use nearly the last of his air to ask one thing: watch over my girl. Bishop had taken that big dying hand in both of his and said the only word that mattered. Always, before we go on, to everyone watching who knows what it is to make a promise to someone you've lost, may God keep you and hold you this morning. Let's take a breath together for every child out there who is scared in the dark right now, and for every grown soul who remembers being that child. This story is for you. Now stay close, because what that little girl was about to do in the dark would wake a whole army out of its sleep. Her name was Lily Mercer, and she was 7 years old, and she was the spitting image of the father she'd lost. Same wide gray eyes, same stubborn chin. She had a gap where her front teeth used to be, and a cowlick that no comb on earth could lay down, the same cowlick her daddy'd had, her mama said, when he was small. She kept a music box on her dresser, a little wooden one Tank had brought her back from a run to Tennessee, and every night before she slept, she wound it once and let it play its few tinny notes, because that was the sound she fell asleep to back when the house was full and warm and right. She still drew him pictures, too, fat crayon bikers with beards down to their belts, and taped them to the inside of her closet door where Wade wouldn't see and take them down. She still talked to him a little, in the dark, after the music box wound down. She didn't tell anyone that. Some things a girl keeps for herself. Inside the music box, under the felt, she kept a card. It was creased soft from handling. On it, in her daddy's blocky print, was a phone number, and Lily knew it by heart even though she was not supposed to use it except for one reason. Because near the end, when Tank could still sit up. He had taken his little girl on his knee and told her something he made her promise to remember. He told her that if she was ever scared, really scared, and he wasn't there, and Mama wasn't there or couldn't help, she was to call that number, and she was to say 3 words, and his brothers would come. All of 'em, baby, he'd told her, his voice gone to gravel. Every last one. You won't have to be scared, because you'll never really be alone. You just call, and you tell 'em who you are, and you watch what happens. She had laughed then, because she was 6, and it sounded like a game. She understood it differently now. Her mama, Rachel, was a good woman ground down thin. With Tank gone, there was no second paycheck, and rent didn't care that a family had been broken in half. So Rachel had taken the night shift stocking shelves at the distribution center 40 minutes off, which meant 3 nights a week Lily was home after dark with the man Rachel had let move in that summer because she was drowning, and he'd seemed, at first, like a hand reaching down. His name was Wade. He was the kind of man who is sweet in daylight and somebody else entirely after the 3rd drink. He had never laid a hand on Lily, not yet. But the house had learned to go quiet when his truck pulled in, the way a field goes quiet before weather. He had a way of looking at Tank's things, the photos on the wall, the leather jacket still hanging by the door that made the air thin. One evening in October, he'd taken that jacket off its hook, said it stunk up the place, and stuffed it in a trash bag for the curb. Lily had pulled it back out after he passed out and hidden it under her bed, and she had not told her mother because telling made things worse. She had learned that already, at 7. She had learned to read a man's footsteps in the hall the way other children learn their letters. The night it happened, Rachel was at work, and Wade had started drinking at 5. By 11, the bottle was empty, and so was his patience, and the house had that thin, ringing wrongness to it that Lily had come to know in her stomach before she knew it in her head. He was banging around the kitchen, talking to no one, getting louder. She heard a glass break against the wall. She heard Tank's framed photo come off its nail and hit the floor, and she heard Wade laugh at the sound of it, and that laugh was the worst thing she'd heard in 8 months. She slid out of bed and crossed to her door on silent feet and pushed the little hook into its eye, the 1/2 inch of brass that was the only lock she had. Then he was in the hallway. Then he was at her door, and the knob turned but the latch held it shut by that 1/2 inch. He hit the door once with the flat of his hand. He told her to open it. He told her, in that low voice that was worse than shouting, that this was his house now, that her daddy was dead and gone and not coming back, and that the sooner she got that through her head, the better it'd go for everybody. Then he went quiet, which was somehow worse, and she heard him go down the hall, and she let out the breath she'd been holding. But he came back. And this time there was a screwdriver in his hand, and he set its tip against the hook latch and began, slow and patient, to work it loose. Lily didn't cry out. She'd learned that too. She slid off the bed onto the floor on the far side, where the shadow was deepest, and she pulled the music box down into her lap, and with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, she peeled back the felt and took out the soft, creased card. She heard the hook give a little. She heard him breathing on the other side of the wood, and in the dark, with her thumb over the keypad of the old phone her mama had left her for emergencies, a 7-year-old girl did the bravest thing anyone in that town would do that year. She dialed the number her father had made her memorize, and she put her hand over her mouth, and when a sleep-rough voice answered on the 3rd ring, she whispered the 3 words. I'm Tank's girl. 200 miles of telephone wire could not flatten what those words did to the man on the other end. Bishop had been asleep for 2 hours. He sat straight up in the dark. For 1 second, the whole world stopped turning. Because that voice, small, terrified, whispering in the night, was the voice of the thing he had promised a dying man he would protect, and it was calling him because it was afraid. "Lily," he said, and his own voice cracked on it. "Lily, honey, it's Bishop. I knew your daddy. Where are you? Are you hurt?" She whispered that she was on the floor in her room, that Mama was at work, that the man was at her door, that she was scared. Bishop was already standing, already pulling on his jeans with one hand, and he made his voice as calm and as solid as 40 years of hard living could make it. "You listen to me," he said. "You stay quiet. You stay low. You keep me right here in your ear. We're already coming." Then he covered the phone, and to his wife, who'd sat up beside him, he said 2 words that put her hand to her mouth. "Wake everybody." He did not call the police first. He would, soon, and they would matter. But Bishop had buried Tank, and Bishop had made a promise, and Bishop knew exactly what his brother had told that little girl would happen, and he would sooner have died than let it be a lie. He kept Lily on the line in his ear the whole time, talking low and steady to her, asking her about her music box, asking what song it played, keeping her small voice tethered to his so the fear couldn't pull her under. While his wife worked the other phone, while the phone tree his charter had used for funerals and floods lit up the dark across 3 counties, 1 window at a time. The message that went out was 4 words long and needed no others. Tank's girl. Sycamore Street. Men who heard it did not ask why. They did not ask what time it was. They put their boots on in the dark and they rode. A man in Ridgeway who lived 4 streets over from Sycamore was rolling out of his driveway within 90 seconds. He got there first, killed his engine at the curb, and walked up onto that porch and knocked on the front door, calm as Sunday, and the scraping at the latch in the hallway stopped cold. Wade pulled the front door open with a curse already loaded, expecting a neighbor he could frighten, and found instead a wide, scarred, unsmiling man in a Hell's Angels cut standing on his porch with his hands loose at his sides. "Heard you're having a hard night," the biker said. That was all. Wade tried bluster. He said a lot of things, fast, about private property and his rights, and who did this guy think he was, and the biker on the porch said nothing back, just stood there like a piece of the house itself, and let the man talk himself thinner and thinner. Down the street a second headlight turned the corner, then a third, then a fourth, close behind, and the sound of them did not fade the way passing traffic fades. It stayed, and it grew. Wade's voice climbed. He pulled out his phone, said he was calling the cops, said these clowns had no idea who they were dealing with. The biker on the porch nodded slowly, like that was a fine idea. "Good," he said. "Call 'em. We'll wait together." He glanced once down the hall toward the child's door, then back at Wade, and something in his calm went colder. "You won't touch that door again," he said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. What Wade did not understand, what he could not have understood, standing there in his sour rage with one frightened child behind a hollow door, was the sound that had begun. Far off, underneath everything. Engines, low at first, the way distant thunder is low. A vibration you feel in your teeth before your ears agree it's real. And then climbing, multiplying, rolling in from the highway and down the county roads and into the sleeping streets of Ridgeway until the windows in their frames began to hum. They came from 3 counties. Men who'd been asleep beside their wives 20 minutes before. Men who'd thrown a cut on over a bare chest and ridden through 38-degree dark without a word of complaint. Because a brother's child had called. And that was the end of the conversation. They poured onto Sycamore Street in the gray before dawn, headlight after headlight after headlight, until the dead-end road could not hold them and they spilled across the frost-white lawns and lined the curbs 4 deep, and one by one the engines died. And the silence that came after 140 motorcycles going quiet at once was the loudest, holiest silence that town had ever held. Porch lights came on up and down the block. Neighbors who'd never so much as waved at the Mercer house stood at their windows in their robes, watching. The men on the lawn paid them no mind. They did not shout. They did not rush the house. They simply arranged themselves, without a word, into a wall of leather and breath and steel across the whole front of that little clapboard home, so that anyone looking out a window would understand instantly and forever that the child inside was not alone, and never would be again. Bishop's bike was at the center of it. He came up the walk slow, an old man in the cold, and the brother on the porch stepped aside for him. And Wade, who had gone very still and very pale somewhere in the last 2 minutes, backed up into the doorway, with nothing left in his mouth. Bishop didn't look at him. He went down on one knee on that frost-bitten porch, level with the height of a 7-year-old, and he said through the open door, gentle as anything that big and gray and scarred has ever said, "Lily? Honey, it's Bishop. You can come out now." The hook latch slid back. The bedroom door opened down the hall, and a small girl in flannel pajamas, clutching her music box to her chest, came down that hallway, past the man who'd terrified her, who did not so much as twitch now, with 140 witnesses on his lawn, and stopped in the doorway, staring out at the impossible thing in her yard. All those men. All that chrome catching the first gray light. All of them looking back at her, and more than a few of them, hard men who hadn't wept in decades, wiping their faces with the backs of their hands. "Are you really Daddy's brothers?" she whispered. Bishop's voice did not hold. "Every one of us, baby," he said. "Your daddy told us you'd call. He made us promise, and we don't ever break a promise to Tank." He held out one big trembling hand, and the little girl set the music box down and walked into the circle of his arm, and on the lawn 140 men took their hats off into the cold, and the only sound on Sycamore Street was a 7-year-old finally, safely, allowing herself to cry. The sheriff's deputies who arrived a few minutes later did not have much to do, which was the point. There were 140 witnesses to a frightened child's call, and it turned out Wade had 2 warrants in the next county over for things he'd done to people who hadn't had anyone to call. He left Sycamore Street in the back of a cruiser as the sun finally cleared the rooftops, and he did not look back at the house, and not one of the men on that lawn gave him the satisfaction of watching him go. Rachel came home from her night shift at 6:45 to find her street full of motorcycles and her daughter wrapped in a leather jacket, 3 sizes too big, sitting on the porch steps in the lap of an old man she'd never met, eating a donut some brother had ridden out for. She got out of her car and stood there and could not make sense of any of it. And then Bishop stood and crossed to her and told her quietly who they were and what her husband had asked of them with the last of his breath. Rachel Mercer put both hands over her face and wept right there on her own front walk. And a stranger she would come to call family put his arm around her and held her up. They did not leave that family to fend alone again. The roof that needed fixing got fixed that spring. A half-dozen brothers and a borrowed ladder and a cooler of sodas on a Saturday. The rent that came up short got quietly made whole more than once. An envelope left on the kitchen table that nobody ever claimed to have put there. There was always, after that morning, a bike or two in the driveway on the nights Rachel worked. A brother on the couch with the game on low, so that Lily Mercer fell asleep 3 nights a week to the sound of her music box, and the low murmur of men who had loved her father keeping watch in the next room. They taught her to check the oil on a Sportster before she was 9. They were in the front row, all of them when she graduated the 5th grade. She was never alone in the dark again. Her daddy had seen to that, from the far side of everything, with a card under the felt of a music box and 3 words she had been brave enough to say. People wonder, sometimes, what a man really leaves behind when he goes. Not money, usually, not a house or a name carved in stone. What Tank Mercer left behind was a promise made to brothers who meant it, and a little girl who believed him enough to whisper 3 words into the dark, and 140 engines that started before sunrise on a cold November morning, because somewhere out there a child he loved was afraid, and they had told him, once, that they would always come. If this story reached you this morning, if you believe that love keeps its promises even from the other side, and that no child should ever face the dark alone, give it a like and send it to someone who needs to be reminded that good people still come when you call. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And ride safe out there. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. And tell me who in your life would answer the phone at 2 in the morning. No questions asked.